January 1944. South China Sea. The night is calm, almost gentle. A Japanese convoy moves westward, its silhouettes barely visible against the low clouds. Cargo ships ride heavy in the water. Oil, rice, machine parts. Everything an empire at war cannot survive without. On deck, sailors scan the darkness, more out of habit than fear. There is no enemy in sight, no aircraft engines, no distant gunfire. Then the sea changes. A sharp explosion tears through the lead ship's hull, low and violent, as if the ocean itself has struck. Seconds later, another blast. Steel screams. Deck lights vanish. Men are thrown into black water, still warm from the day's sun. There is no warning, no battle line, no visible attacker. Below the surface, an American submarine slips away in silence. For Japanese sailors, this is the most frightening enemy of all, one that cannot be seen, challenged, or chased. Convoys begin to vanish without explanation. Routes once considered safe become graves. The realization spreads slowly, painfully. The sea lanes are no longer open. They are being closed, one ship at a time. These disappearances did not happen by chance. They were the result of years of dependence, miscalculation, and a silent American campaign that transformed the Pacific Ocean into a battlefield without a front line. Long before the first American submarine slipped into Japanese shipping lanes, Japan's war effort rested on a single, fragile assumption: the sea would remain open. Japan was an island empire with limited natural resources. It had almost no domestic oil, little iron ore, and insufficient food to sustain a long industrial war. Everything that powered its navy, fed its cities, and armed its soldiers had to arrive by ship. Oil flowed north from the Dutch East Indies. Iron and coal crossed from China and Manchuria. Rice and supplies moved constantly between the home islands and the expanding perimeter of empire. In the 1930s, Japanese planners understood this vulnerability, but underestimated the threat. Their naval doctrine was shaped by decisive surface battles, not prolonged economic warfare. Submarines, in Japanese thinking, were tools to weaken enemy fleets before a final clash, not weapons meant to strangle commerce. Merchant defense was considered secondary. Convoy systems were poorly developed. Escort vessels were scarce and lightly equipped. When war broke out in December 1941, Japanese sea lanes stretched thousands of miles across the Pacific and Southeast Asia. At first, they seemed secure. American submarines were few in number, scattered, and constrained by restrictive rules of engagement. Early patrols produced limited results. Japanese sailors continued to believe that submarines were a nuisance, not a strategic danger. This confidence was reinforced by early American failure. U.S. submarines entered the war with serious disadvantages. Crews were trained for cautious operations. Commanders lacked experience in large-scale commerce raiding. Most damaging of all, the Mark 14 torpedo, the primary American submarine weapon, was deeply flawed. It ran too deep, detonators failed, and perfectly executed attacks often produced nothing more than dull thuds against enemy hulls. Japanese shipping losses in 1942 remained manageable. Sailors joked about missed torpedoes. Officers filed reports suggesting American submarines were ineffective. Cargo continued to move. Oil tankers sailed with minimal escort. The war economy kept breathing. But beneath this surface calm, something was changing. American industry was awakening. New submarines rolled off assembly lines with increasing speed. Fleet boats, long-range, heavily armed, capable of operating deep in enemy waters, began to appear in a number Japan had not anticipated. Training improved. Commanders grew bolder. Patrol zones expanded. At the same time, American leadership quietly removed restrictions. Submarine captains were encouraged to hunt aggressively. Engagement rules loosened. Lessons from early failures were absorbed, not ignored. By mid-1943, the torpedo crisis was finally confronted. Investigations proved what submarine crews had long suspected. The weapons were faulty. Depth controls were corrected. Detonators redesigned. Confidence returned, not loudly but decisively. Japanese shipping, meanwhile, remained exposed. Convoys were inconsistent. Escorts lacked effective sonar. Air cover was sporadic. Radar was limited. Many merchant crews were civilian sailors with minimal combat training, sailing predictable routes along coastlines and choke points. Slowly, American submarines learned those routes. They waited near straits. They watched harbor entrances. They tracked shipping patterns not by sight, but by habit. Sinkings increased, not dramatically at first, but steadily. Ships vanished without survivors. Others limped back to port scarred and burning. Japanese sailors began to notice the absences. A tanker overdue, a freighter that never arrived, supplies delayed without explanation. At first, these losses were written off as accidents or isolated attacks. But as 1943 drew to a close, denial became harder to maintain. The sea lanes were still open on maps. But at sea, something invisible was beginning to close them. That realization would soon deepen, as American submarines refined their methods and turned Japan's greatest strength, its ocean lifelines, into its most fatal weakness. By late 1943, the war at sea was no longer defined by fleets clashing in daylight. It was being decided in silence, beneath the waves, far from headlines or victory parades. American submarine doctrine had evolved through failure. Early caution gave way to precision and patience. Commanders learned that sinking one ship in the wrong place mattered less than sinking many ships in the right places. The focus shifted from opportunistic attacks to systematic disruption. Geography became a weapon. Japanese shipping had to pass through narrow corridors. Luzon Strait, the South China Sea, the waters around Formosa, and the approaches to home islands. These were not open oceans, but funnels. American submarines began to patrol them relentlessly. Instead of chasing targets, they waited. Days, sometimes weeks. The ocean became a net stretched tight across Japan's arteries. Technology amplified this advantage. American submarines were among the most advanced in the world. Surface search radar allowed them to detect ships at night or in poor weather. Improved sonar helped track escorts without revealing position. Fire control, computers increased torpedo accuracy. Communications improved coordination, allowing patrol areas to be assigned efficiently and adjusted as intelligence evolved. Japanese escorts lagged behind. Many destroyers and patrol craft were diverted to fleet operations, leaving merchant shipping underprotected. Sonar sets were crude and unreliable. Depth charges were limited in number and poorly coordinated. Even when submarines were detected, escorts often lacked the training or endurance to pursue them effectively. Meanwhile, American commanders adapted psychologically. Submarine warfare demanded restraint. Crews learned to live in confinement for months. Attacks were calculated, not impulsive. A missed opportunity was often safer than a reckless shot. This discipline increased survivability and effectiveness. By 1944, U.S. submarines were sinking ships with frightening consistency. The Japanese response was fragmented. Convoy systems were expanded, but too late. Air patrols increased, but fuel shortages limited flight time. Emergency construction of escort vessels could not keep pace with losses. Mines were laid in desperation, but submarines adjusted their routes. Each countermeasure met a quiet American answer, and then came the numbers. In 1944 alone, American submarines sank hundreds of Japanese ships. Tankers were hit especially hard. Oil imports fell sharply. Refineries slowed. Training flights were cut back. Warships remained in harbor for lack of fuel. Factories struggled to operate at capacity. For Japanese sailors, the change was unmistakable. Routes once traveled routinely became feared. Crews sailed knowing that danger did not announce itself. There was no warning siren for a submarine, no horizon to scan. Men listened to the water, to the creak of hulls, to the faint hum of engines, wondering which sound might be the last. Some began to believe the sea itself had turned against them. American submarines were no longer isolated hunters. They were a system, industrial, tactical, and relentless. Each patrol built on the last. Intelligence reports refined targets. Success bred confidence, but not complacency. What shocked Japanese sailors most was not a single attack, but the pattern. Entire sea lanes began to fail. Supplies vanished before reaching port. Convoys arrived half empty. Survivors told identical stories. No warning, sudden explosions, unseen enemies. By the end of 1944, Japan's maritime lifelines were critically damaged. The empire still held territory. It still fielded armies. But its ability to move, supply, and sustain them was collapsing. The ocean had become a barrier instead of a bridge. And within that suffocating reality, different perspectives, human, technological, tactical, and moral, began to reveal how completely American submarines had changed the character of the war. By 1944, morale had deteriorated sharply. Sailors spoke in hushed tones about cursed routes and deadly waters. Some believed American submarines could hear heartbeats through the hull. Others believed the sea itself was haunted by invisible machines. The reality was simpler and more terrifying. The enemy was patient, trained, and always present. That human fear was intensified by a technological imbalance Japanese sailors could neither see nor counter. Angle 2. Technology as the invisible advantage for Japanese merchant sailors. The war was not fought with rifles or aircraft. It was fought in engine rooms, cargo holds, and narrow bunks that smelled of oil and salt. Many were civilians pressed into service, men who had never expected to face combat at sea. Their ships were slow, lightly armed, and built to carry goods, not to survive explosions. Life aboard these vessels became a test of nerves. Sailors slept in their clothes. Lifeboats were kept ready at all times. Smoking on deck was forbidden at night, not for discipline, but for fear of attracting unseen attackers. Every vibration of the hull carried meaning. Every mechanical sound could be mistaken for danger. When attacks came, they came without warning. A torpedo did not announce itself. There was no incoming fire to dodge, no enemy silhouette to engage. One moment, the ship was moving through calm water. The next, the deck lifted violently, lights failed, and the smell of fuel filled the air. Survivors described the same sensation again and again, confusion first, then fear, then helplessness. Many never even saw what struck them. Rescue was uncertain. Escorts often broke formation to chase submarines, leaving damaged ships behind. Lifeboats drifted for days. Some sailors were recovered by passing vessels. Others were not. Rumors spread faster than official reports. Entire crews vanished between ports. American submarines did not dominate through numbers alone. They dominated through systems. Radar changed the nature of night at sea. While Japanese ships relied on eyesight and limited lookouts, American submarines could detect convoys long before being seen. A blip on a screen was enough. Distance and darkness no longer protected targets. Fire control computers allowed submarine crews to calculate precise firing solutions under pressure. Torpedoes could be launched from depth at angles that made counterattack difficult. Improved detonators meant explosions now followed impact reliably. Communication was equally decisive. Submarines transmitted patrol reports, contact sightings, and sinking confirmations. Intelligence officers compiled this data, mapping shipping patterns across the Pacific. Future patrols were guided not by chance, but by analysis, each sinking sharpened the next attack. Japanese technology lagged behind. Sonar sets were often outdated or ineffective. Radar coverage was limited and uneven. Escorts lacked coordination. Many counterattacks were conducted blindly. Depth charges dropped more in hope than accuracy. Submarines learned to exploit these weaknesses, slipping beneath thermal layers or waiting out attacks in silence. The result was asymmetry. Japanese sailors faced an enemy that could see without being seen, hear without being heard, and strike without warning. Technology removed uncertainty from the attacker and concentrated entirely on the target. Ships sailed knowing they were visible. Submarines hunted knowing they were not. Yet technology alone did not seal Japan's fate. It was how American commanders applied it, methodically and strategically, that turned entire sea lanes into dead zones. Angle 3, the enemy's miscalculation. Japanese naval leadership recognized the submarine threat, but never fully accepted its scale. Doctrine favored decisive fleet action. Resources were allocated accordingly. Submarines were expected to weaken enemy warships, not hunt merchants. Merchant defense remained an afterthought. Even as losses mounted, the idea that submarines could decide a war at sea struggled to gain acceptance. Reports from merchant crews were often minimized. Sinkings were attributed to bad luck or isolated patrols. Statistics were underreported. Reality was softened to preserve confidence. By the time recognition came, options were limited. Shipbuilding could not replace losses quickly enough. Escort training took time Japan did not have. Fuel shortages restricted both air patrols and naval responses. The system that might have countered submarine warfare simply did not exist. Japanese sailors sensed this disconnect. They faced danger daily, while assurances from command grew increasingly hollow. Protection promised on paper did not appear at sea. Each voyage felt like a gamble with narrowing odds. The enemy, it seemed, had understood something Japan had not. War could be won without visible battles. As losses accumulated and fear hardened into expectation, American submarines refined their tactics even further, targeting not ships at random, but the arteries that kept an empire alive. American submarines did not roam the Pacific aimlessly. By 1944, their patrol zones were chosen with surgical intent. Japanese shipping moved along predictable routes, hugging coastlines and passing through narrow straits to conserve fuel and avoid open ocean exposure. These routes, Luzon Strait, the waters around Formosa, the approaches to the South China Sea, became natural ambush points. Submarine commanders studied charts until they knew currents, depths, and traffic patterns as well as harbor pilots. Instead of attacking everywhere, they attacked where it mattered most. Submarines positioned themselves along these funnels, often operating independently, but guided by shared intelligence. A single successful patrol could disrupt traffic for weeks. Ships rerouted into longer, riskier passages, increasing fuel consumption and exposure. Delays compounded shortages already growing inside Japan. Night attacks became common. Using radar, submarines surfaced after dark, approaching convoys at high speed. From the surface, they were faster and more maneuverable than submerged escorts. Torpedoes were fired from close range. Then the submarine vanished again beneath the waves, leaving confusion and burning wreckage behind. Japanese countermeasures struggled to adapt. Escorts dropped depth charges in patterns learned too late. Some attacks continued long after submarines had slipped away. Others were called off to protect damaged ships, creating new openings for follow-up attacks. Submarine commanders exploited this hesitation, sometimes returning hours later to finish crippled targets. The choke points tightened. By mid-1944, some sea lanes were effectively closed during daylight. Convoys moved only at night or in bad weather, further slowing deliveries. Insurance rates rose. Sailors requested reassignment. The ocean itself became a deterrent. But beyond tactics, leadership shaped how this campaign unfolded. Quietly, relentlessly, and with an understanding of time as a weapon. Angle 5, leadership, the patience of American commanders. Submarine warfare rewarded restraint more than aggression. American commanders understood this early. Many were seasoned officers who had endured the frustrations of faulty torpedoes and early failure. By the time their weapons worked, they had learned to trust discipline over impulse. Targets were chosen carefully. Tankers were prioritized over smaller freighters. Escorts were avoided unless necessary. Survival mattered as much as success. A submarine loss was not easily replaced, even by American industry. Leadership extended beyond individual boats. Fleet command coordinated patrols, rotated crews, and refined doctrine based on after-action reports. Mistakes were analyzed, not punished. Innovation was encouraged. Crews suggested improvements that reached designers and planners quickly. This culture of adaptation mattered. While Japanese command structures often resisted change, American submarine forces evolved continuously. Each patrol made the next more lethal. Each success informed the next decision. To Japanese sailors, this adaptability felt supernatural. They faced an enemy that seemed to learn from every encounter, while their own protections remained unchanged. Escorts repeated the same maneuvers. Routes remained the same. Predictability became fatal. The imbalance in leadership translated into a moral weight as well, one that pressed heavily on those trapped inside Japan's collapsing maritime system. Angle 6, the moral weight of silent warfare. Submarine warfare was impersonal by design. American crews rarely saw the faces of those they sank. Periscopes revealed shapes, not lives. Explosions were observed from a distance. The ocean erased evidence quickly. This distance allowed efficiency, but carried its own burden. Some American submariners recorded discomfort at attacking unarmed merchant ships. Others accepted it as necessity. Orders were clear. The objective was not glory, but isolation. Starve the war machine, not confront it directly. For Japanese sailors, the moral experience was inverted. They faced death without confrontation. There was no chance to surrender, no opponent to resist. Survival depended on chance alone. Many felt abandoned by a system that sent them to sea with inadequate protection. This asymmetry deepened the psychological impact. American submarines represented inevitability rather than menace. They did not chase victory. They waited for it. Each sinking was not an event, but a repetition. Another link broken in a chain that could no longer be repaired. By late 1944, Japanese sailors no longer asked if an attack would come. They asked when. That question would soon be answered decisively. As the submarine campaign reached its turning point and Japan's maritime lifelines finally collapsed,